Nostalgic Culture Channel presents. He had it all: looks, talent, youth, and fame. But for him, it wasn't enough. Do you remember him?
Darling, for so long, you and me been finding each other for so long.
He was born into one of the most talented families in music history. He had everything: beauty, talent, and wealth. Yet his young and happy heart wasn't ready to face the dark side of show business and was ultimately consumed by addiction, depression, and heartache. Let's explore the full story of the short, turbulent, and tragic life of Andy Gibb. Andrew Roy Gibb was born on March 5, 1958, in Stamford, England. He was the youngest of Barbara and Hugh Gibb's children. Andy had 4 siblings: Barry, twins Robin and Maurice, and a sister, Leslie. When Andy was just 6 months old, his family, who didn't have much money at the time, decided to take advantage of an assisted migration program. Australia needed workers and settlers, so the British government offered to pay for the journey and provide good jobs in this far-off country. In 1959, little Andy and all his siblings set off for Australia. Interestingly, a dancer named Carol Jones was among the many English passengers on that ship. Years later, she gave birth to a daughter who became a famous singer, Kylie Minogue, the pride of Australia. In 1967, after 8 years in the country, Andy and his family returned to England. By then, Andy's older brothers had made a name for themselves in Australia, singing in small clubs under the name Bee Gees. Yes, the Bee Gees. Their greatest success, however, would come in England, where they became one of the most legendary and renowned groups in music history. Andy was always a cheerful, funny, and mischievous child, a trait many attributed to his parents, who forgave all his antics. Some believed he was a bit spoiled. Andy's mother, Barbara, also shared stories about his childhood. She recalled how she would send him off to school, only to discover later that instead of attending class, he would hide in the stables and spend the day sleeping among the horses. He'd return home smelling like manure, but would swear up and down that he had gone to school. Thanks to the immense success of the Bee Gees, young Andy enjoyed a very comfortable childhood, with far more money than most kids his age could ever imagine. When Andy was just 12 years old, his parents had a luxury Rolls-Royce with a chauffeur at his disposal, ready to take him to school or wherever he wished to go. At first, this amused his classmates, but as is often the case, they eventually grew resentful and began to bully him. Andy soon grew bored with school and dropped out at the age of 13. Instead, he picked up a guitar that his older brother Barry had given him and started performing for tourists on the island of Ibiza. He earned some money by doing covers of songs by his famous brothers. Andy's first recording was a song titled "My Father's a Rebel," which he recorded in August 1973. It was written by his brother Maurice.
Tell my father is a red, tell my father is a red, and my mother didn't even know his game.
By June 1974, at just 16 years old, Andy had formed his first band, Melody Fair, named after one of his brother's songs. At times, there was talk of Andy joining the Bee Gees. However, the reality was that the age gap between them was significant, and Andy didn't like the idea of being publicly viewed as the youngest in the family. He decided he wanted to succeed on his own. His brother Barry believed that since Australia had been a great training ground for the Bee Gees, Andy should start his music career there as well. Following Barry's advice, Andy returned to Australia at the end of 1974, bringing his bandmates along. Upon arrival, he was welcomed by his sister Leslie, who had married and decided to live in the country permanently. There, the young band got to work and wrote several songs. At just 16, Andy Gibb made his first appearance on Australian television. Unfortunately, the experience in the country didn't live up to expectations. When the Bee Gees began their career in Australia, they struggled to gain recognition and had little money, but they worked tirelessly. Their success was the result of many hours of hard work and sacrifice. However, things were different for their youngest brother. Andy wasn't short on money, as his brothers were very generous with him. His bandmates weren't as fortunate. If they wanted to eat, they had to work. But Andy was constantly partying, drinking, meeting lots of women, and often disappearing for long periods. The work pace was inconsistent and interrupted, which led to his disappointed bandmates returning to England. After that, Andy joined another band called Zenta, where he found some local success.
Introducing on stage, Andy Gibb and Zenta.
Here we are in a room full of strangers.
However, this project didn't last long either. In November 1975, at the age of 17, Andy released the first single of his career, Words and Music.
For all the love you brought along, I'll be your day, I'll be your night. I'll see that everything's alright.
Although it only reached number 78 on the Australian charts, it would gain recognition over the years. On July 11, 1976, in a surprising move, Andy married Kim Reeder, an Englishwoman he had met in school and dated a few times. Andy was just 18 years old. In 1977, the young couple moved to the United States, where Andy's brothers had already achieved worldwide fame and were enjoying all the luxuries money could buy. As loving brothers, they invited the youngest of the family to join them. But Andy's intense and party-loving personality was not equipped to handle the darker side of fame and the show business world. Though Andy had experimented with some illegal substances, it had only been on occasion. Suddenly, he was thrust into a world where drugs were the norm, and with his tendency toward excess, Andy couldn't resist. The youngest Gibb brother started living a wild life of partying, heavy drinking, and non-stop celebrations. His behavior became so outrageous that even his family members were shocked. His wife tried to intervene and threatened to leave him, prompting Andy to try to slow down. Having famous brothers made Andy's path much easier. In early 1977, the Bee Gees helped him secure a solo recording contract, and they immediately started working on some songs for him. In April 1977, Andy released the single, I Just Want to Be Your Everything.
If you give a little more than you're asking for, your love will take it. I just wanna be your everything.
The song was written for him by his brother Barry, who also provided backing vocals. Joe Walsh from the Eagles played guitar on the track as a special favor to the Bee Gees. Barry Gibb wrote this hit song in just 20 minutes, which was enough time to create a massive success. The track won multiple gold records and generated significant financial gains. I Just Want to Be Your Everything reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on July 30, 1977, and stayed there for 4 weeks. The song also reached number 1 in countries like Australia and Canada. In the UK charts, its highest position was 26th. At just 19 years old, Andy became a teenage heartthrob and quickly earned his first millions. Fans considered him the most handsome of the brothers and believed he had the best voice. But what do you think? Well, in September 1977, Andy Gibb released his debut album, Flowing Rivers, and his second single, Love Is Thicker Than Water, which was yet another huge hit. This song also topped the Billboard charts, solidifying Andy's status as a superstar, on par with his famous brothers. Women flocked to Andy. He was good-looking, famous, and charming. And with that, the drug-fueled parties multiplied. Of all the drugs available, Andy became addicted to cocaine, one of the most addictive substances. Always eager to please everyone, he frequently spent his money on wild parties, buying drugs and alcohol, and picking up the tab for everyone. His wife couldn't take it anymore. Andy begged her for forgiveness, but she left him and returned to Australia. What neither of them knew at the time was that Kim was pregnant when she boarded the plane back home. Andy Gibb and Kim Reeder divorced on January 15, 1978, and their daughter Peta was born 10 days later. In recent years, Andy's daughter has said that she didn't really know her father. She knew she had a father, and that he was a famous singer, but to her, Andy Gibb was just a voice on the other end of the phone that she heard a few times. Peta now has 2 children, Darby and Flynn, who never got to meet their famous grandfather. To escape the pain of his wife leaving him, Andy began working on his second album, Shadow Dancing, which was released in April 1978. The title track was a massive hit and became Andy's 3rd song to reach #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, where it stayed for 7 weeks.
You got me looking at that heaven in your eyes. I'm a shadow dancing, baby, you do it right.
This hit was written by all 4 Gibb brothers. From this album, 2 more successful singles were released, An Everlasting Love
I've been here all your life. Maybe an everlasting love.
and Don't Throw It All Away.
You alone are the living thing, keeps me alive. Don't throw it all away, our love, don't throw it all away, our love.
Between July 1977 and July 1978, Andy achieved something unprecedented for an American solo artist. His first 3 singles all reached #1 on the charts. Feel free to share your favorite song by Andy Gibb in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from. On January 9, 1979, Andy Gibb appeared at the famous UNICEF show, which brought together the biggest stars of the time to fight against child hunger in Africa. During this event, the renowned group ABBA performed their hit Chiquitita, which they donated to UNICEF. Other stars such as Donna Summer, Olivia Newton-John, and Rod Stewart also graced the occasion. In February 1980, Andy released his 3rd and final studio album, After Dark, which featured 2 successful songs, Desire
In a world that's ever turning, you are desire, everything you need.
and a duet with Olivia Newton-John titled I Can't Help It.
I can't help it. Take away the lonely days gone by, make it every day for you and I.
Andy also had a romantic relationship with the beautiful Olivia. In March 1980, the band Queen invited Andy to record the first verse of their song, Play the Game. Although Andy met with them and recorded the verse several times for unknown reasons, the recording was never used in the final cut. In September 1980, a compilation album of Andy's hits was released, which included 2 new songs, Time is Time, which would reach #15 in January 1981,
Living and breathing in some misbelief. Time is time. Don't give me no time to waste away.
and Me Without You, which peaked at #40 on the charts.
Without you, there ain't no love. Everything lost to the wind. You were the
Andy Gibb's struggles with addiction were escalating, and the record label's manager decided to drop him and not renew his contract. His behavior was becoming increasingly problematic for everyone around him. For a record label, known for being profit-driven, to terminate the contract of such a successful and talented artist, it shows just how much drugs were affecting Andy's personal and professional life. In January 1981, while Andy was filming for The John Davidson Show, he met actress Victoria Principal, famous for her role as Pamela Barnes on the hit TV series Dallas.
And I only watched Dallas for one reason, Victoria Principal.
You mean if there would be one person in the world that you would like to meet, it would be Victoria Principal from Dallas?
The chemistry was instant, and the 2 stars began a romance that dominated magazine covers at the time. Andy's brothers disapproved of the relationship because Victoria was 30 years old, while Andy was just 22. The family's rejection of Victoria grew stronger when they noticed her drug use, especially cocaine, which only fueled Andy's own addiction rather than helping him recover. Andy fell deeply in love and ignored all the criticism. They celebrated their love by singing a duet, All I Have to Do Is Dream, which only reached #51 on the Billboard charts.
All I have to do is dream, 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 dream.
This recording would be Andy's last single and the only song Victoria ever recorded. Andy's behavior was becoming increasingly unstable. He drank excessively, missed interviews, and canceled performances at the last minute. On one occasion, as Andy was preparing to board a plane at Los Angeles International Airport, authorities confiscated a firearm from him and detained him for several hours. In another incident, several grams of cocaine were found in a bag he was carrying at the airport. Magazines of the time splashed photos of him in handcuffs, being led into a police car. Between 1981 and 1982, Andy was hired to host the famous music show Solid Gold. But after a few months, he was fired for bad behavior and absenteeism caused by his cocaine addiction. Then, in March 1982, Victoria told Andy she no longer wanted to see him and went on to marry a wealthy plastic surgeon. Soon after, Andy fell into a deep depression. He spent entire days locked in his room, using drugs, not eating, not speaking to anyone. A complete downward spiral. The breakup with Victoria was the hardest blow of his life, as he was deeply in love with her. In 1983, Andy had the opportunity to star in several major musicals on Broadway. Despite showing great talent, he was fired after a few months. In the words of the producer, when Andy was at the theater, he was a joy. But he wasn't there enough. We'd lose him over long weekends. He'd come back on Tuesday, and he'd look beat. He was like a little puppy, so ashamed when he did something wrong. He was all heart, but he didn't have enough muscle to carry through. Andy's struggles with addiction and depression were consuming him, and he was spending so much money that his financial situation became precarious. In 1984, Andy was invited to Latin America and performed at the famous Viña del Mar festival in Chile, where he played his greatest hits for 2 nights and gave an emotional closing performance of his own version of Hey Jude.
Hey Jude, don't let me down. Na, 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 na. Everybody say, hey Jude, hey Jude, hey Jude.
By 1985, Andy's addiction problems had become so severe that his entire family intervened, convincing him to check into the famous Betty Ford Center. After a few months of treatment, there appeared to be some improvement. Andy returned to work, making appearances on various television shows and performing in small venues where he sang his hits along with covers of classic songs.
There is a reason why this world is round. There's a fire all around you.
In 1986, Andy Gibb, who had earned his first $1 million before the age of 20 and whose fortune had grown to $10 million just a few years later, found himself bankrupt. He had only $7,000 left and was over $50,000 in debt. Witnesses claimed that during the peak of his decline, Andy was spending $1,000 a night on drugs at parties. In 1987, Andy suffered a severe collapse due to substance abuse and was hospitalized once again. His brothers provided financial support, and Andy filed for bankruptcy. After several months, it seemed that he had overcome his addictions and was starting anew. During this period of sobriety, Andy pursued an unexpected dream. He began taking lessons to become a commercial airline pilot. Despite his brother's skepticism, he successfully earned his pilot's license by the end of 1987. Andy was always a dreamer. Later in 1987, with a renewed sense of purpose, he began working on new music and wanted to record another album. His brother Barry arranged a deal with Island Records in Europe. However, when Andy arrived in England, he experienced a severe panic attack and missed his meetings with the label. As a result, the contract was never signed, and some of the songs he had prepared were only released posthumously. Barry, the eldest of the Gibb brothers, later remarked that by this point, Andy's struggles were no longer just with drugs or alcohol, but something much deeper. Andy seemed to lack the ability to navigate life and defend himself against its challenges. In February 1988, Andy suffered several panic attacks and fell into a deep depression. His brothers tried to support him, but they were at a loss for how to help. On March 7, 1988, just 2 days after his 30th birthday, Andy Gibb complained of severe chest pains and was admitted to the hospital. On March 10th, he lost consciousness and passed away a few hours later. The autopsy revealed that years of cocaine abuse had severely damaged his heart, and he died from myocarditis, a serious inflammation of the heart. Andy Gibb was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills. In an interview, Maurice Gibb said, "Andy abused drugs and cocaine in his youth. In Los Angeles, he was surrounded by drug addicts. We heard that he drank for 48 hours and ended up in the hospital." A day before his 30th birthday, I called him, and he said he couldn't talk because he was out of it. I told him to get his act together. I hung up, feeling upset, and thought, when will he ever learn? Just 3 days later, someone called me at 6 a.m. to tell me he had died. I just dropped the phone in shock. We had had a conversation, and I had told him things like, focus on what was wrong. Instead of being supportive, I was very angry with him. That was our last conversation, and I deeply regret it. I'm so sorry I spoke to him that way. A week later, we had to record. We thought maybe doing so would help us move on. But when Barry and Robin started crying, I couldn't keep playing either, so I walked out. A month later, we went back to the studio and recorded "Wish You Were Here." It was hard to sing, but we felt we needed to do it. The melody was so emotional that Barry and Robin said, "Yes, we'll sing it next week," and we all left. Andy Gibb was a golden boy, a dreamer who had everything in life, but he didn't know how to handle it. He flew too close to the sun of fame, and it quickly burned his wings. He was too young to die, but the intensity of his life wore him out before his time. Well, friends, this was our tribute to Andy Gibb, the youngest brother of the Bee Gees. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on his tragic and short-lived career, and tell us your favorite song of his. Don't forget to check out our other videos on the channel. See you soon.